Imagine having a secret map, a map that can guide you through storms of uncertainty, crises, and even the greatest failures of your life. Well, billionaire investor Ray Dalio spent decades drawing that map. He calls it principles, not abstract theories, but rules forged from blood, sweat, and mistakes that nearly destroyed him. Today, we're going to unfold that map, trace its path, and uncover how a set of principles transformed one man from the edge of bankruptcy to becoming a global financial legend. This is a story about navigating the impossible, about turning the deck of chaos against itself and coming out on top. It's a business story, sure, but it's also a survival guide for anyone who's ever felt lost in a world that's spinning out of control. So if you're ready to chart your own course through the storms of life, then grab a pen and paper because we're about to get started. We're about to enter a world where money is abundant but scarce at the same time. Confused? Let me explain. Imagine a nation as a massive engine that never stops turning. This engine runs on a special kind of fuel called credit. When credit flows freely, the economy spins faster. Asset prices surge and people believe the future is full of promise. But just like sugar gives you a quick rush before the crash, credit comes with a dangerous aftertaste. Ray Dalio calls this the big debt cycle, a repeating pattern in economic history. It always begins the same way: a grand credit party, followed by a brutal hangover when the debt piles up. In the early stages, credit feels like magic. Governments encourage banks to lend more. Companies expand aggressively, and people spend without hesitation. The economy booms, the stock market soars, and public confidence hits its peak. But beneath the surface, the numbers begin to swell. Debt quietly grows larger and larger, hiding in plain sight. Nobody worries yet. That's how the trap is set, waiting for the right moment to snap shut. At first, debt seems like a useful tool, a way to finance new opportunities and boost the economy. But as Dalio explains, debt is like a chronic illness. At first, the symptoms are mild, but left untreated, it begins to weaken the body of the nation. As debt repayments grow, money that should be invested in growth and development is swallowed by interest payments. The once agile economy slows down. Monetary policy becomes fragile, because even the smallest change in interest rates can shake the system. This is what Dalio calls credit addiction, a dependency on debt that's almost impossible to break. Japan in the 1990s is a textbook example. Once hailed as the miracle economy of Asia, Japan fell into decades of stagnation after a massive credit boom and asset bubble burst. The government chose to maintain its debt instead of restructuring it, trapping the country in a debt overhang for generations. As the cycle matures, debt begins to weigh on everyday life. Loan interest rates rise, taxes creep higher, and purchasing power fades. Governments face a deadly dilemma. They need to issue more bonds to pay existing debt, but markets start to lose trust. Without that trust, borrowing becomes more expensive, pushing the country into what Dalio calls a debt squeeze. This is the tipping point, the moment when a nation's stability starts to crack. Then comes the inevitable question: what happens when a central bank runs out of ammunition? It can print money to buy government debt, but that only delays the collapse while eroding the value of the currency. History has shown where this road leads. From Weimar, Germany, to Zimbabwe, where hyperinflation wiped out savings in a matter of months, money became nothing more than worthless paper. It might sound distant, but no country is truly immune to this cycle. Indonesia, India, Brazil, all are vulnerable if they rely too heavily on debt without fixing structural weaknesses. Dalio's warning is clear. Understanding how the debt machine works is the first step to controlling it, because in this cycle, the brake is just as important as the accelerator. And right now, we're all in the same vehicle, speeding down a road that has already taken many nations to the brink of ruin. When the market loses faith in a country, it doesn't happen with a loud bang. It starts quietly, almost invisibly. A small shift in sentiment, a subtle drop in demand for government bonds. Investors once eager to lend begin asking silent questions. Will this nation be able to pay me back? It's in these early tremors that the foundations begin to crack. And yet, for those inside the system, everything still feels normal. That's the danger. The collapse doesn't begin with panic. It begins with denial. Governments facing mounting debts often choose the easiest path: more borrowing. They issue bonds, they promise future payments, they assure the public that growth will take care of everything. But the market is not blind. When debt grows faster than the economy, when promises start to look like wishful thinking, the price of trust rises. Interest rates climb. And for a heavily indebted country, a small increase in interest is like a knife in the chest. Every tick upward bleeds the budget dry. Dalio describes this phase as the trust erosion spiral. Once investors suspect risk, they demand higher returns. Higher returns mean higher borrowing costs, which deepen the deficit. The deficit forces the government to borrow even more, which further erodes trust. It's a feedback loop, each turn of the cycle tighter than the last, until confidence snaps entirely. When that moment comes, the reaction is swift, merciless, and unstoppable. We've seen it before. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis swept through Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea like a financial wildfire. One day, investors were pouring in capital. The next, they were fleeing in mass exodus. Exchange rates collapsed, interest rates skyrocketed, and entire industries crumbled in months. Dalio points out that what triggered the chain reaction was in just bad economics. It was the collective decision of global capital to say, "We no longer believe you." Inside the country, the crisis feels like a storm tearing through every layer of society. Banks restrict withdrawals. Companies slash jobs. The cost of imports, food, fuel, medicine, surges overnight. For ordinary citizens, it's not an abstract problem anymore. It's the price of bread doubling in a week, savings evaporating. It's the cold realization that their government's promises mean nothing if the market won't listen. Central banks, desperate to stop the bleeding, often resort to printing money. At first, it works. The currency stabilizes for a moment. Markets calm. But this is only a temporary sedative. The printed money doesn't create real value. It dilutes the value of what already exists. As confidence drains, people rush to convert their cash into something tangible. Gold, foreign currency, even basic goods. Anything but the local money. This rush accelerates inflation, and in some cases, tips the economy into hyperinflation. The lesson is stark and inescapable. The moment a country loses market trust, the clock starts ticking. From that point on, survival becomes a race against time to restructure debt, rebuild credibility, and restore confidence before the spiral becomes irreversible. Because once trust is gone, there is no easy way back. And history is littered with the ruins of nations that thought they had more time. When economies falter, the cracks quickly spread to a nation's politics. Debt is never just about numbers. It's about power, trust, and survival. When money is abundant, political factions can coexist under a shared prosperity. But when the money runs out, the mask comes off. The fight for limited resources begins, and every decision becomes a battle line. In this phase, which Ray Dalio calls internal conflict, the blame game dominates the headlines. The opposition accuses the ruling government of mismanagement. Government accuses the markets, foreign powers, or even the previous administration. This is not just theater. It's a reflection of a deeper truth. When debt overwhelms a nation, every choice has a loser. Raise taxes, and you anger the working class and businesses. Cut spending, and you strip away vital services. Inflate the currency, and you punish savers and the middle class. There is no move without pain. During this phase, Dalio explains that a country's social contract begins to fray. People lose faith not just in the economy, but in their leaders, their institutions, and sometimes even their neighbors. The debt crisis becomes a crisis of identity. Who are we as a nation, and who do we protect first? This question splits societies along class, ethnic and ideological lines, as each group demands a different solution or demands to be spared the worst of the pain. History offers chilling parallels. In Weimar Germany, economic collapse fueled political extremism as desperate citizens turned to radical voices promising salvation. In Latin America's repeated debt crises, austerity measures sparked mass protests, strikes, and even riots. Dalio warns that in this phase, the danger is not just economic instability. It is political radicalization. People no longer debate policy. They question the entire system. On the streets, the crisis is no longer an abstract debate in Parliament. It's visible in shuttered shops, endless unemployment lines, and protests swelling in city squares. Ordinary citizens who may have once disagreed quietly over coffee now march side by side, united only by frustration. And yet, this unity is fragile. It can turn to anger between groups in an instant, especially when the government begins to pick winners and losers in the distribution of aid or resources. The irony, Dalio notes, is that during this political chaos, the economy suffers even more. Investors hesitate to commit capital when leadership looks unstable. Businesses delay expansion when policy changes seem unpredictable. International partners demand higher returns or refuse loans altogether. The very political storm caused by the debt crisis deepens the economic hole, creating a vicious cycle where distrust feeds decline and decline feeds distrust. In this phase, survival depends on leadership that can bridge divides rather than exploit them. But history's record is grim. More often, leaders choose to consolidate their own power rather than take the painful unifying path. Dalio leaves us with a sobering thought. Once a society fractures under the weight of debt, putting it back together is far harder than preventing the break in the first place. And in the background, the clock of economic collapse keeps ticking. When a nation stands on the edge of financial collapse, the decisions made are no longer about strategy, they're about survival. In this phase, the government is like a drowning swimmer, grasping at anything to stay above the surface. The air is thick with urgency. Every day without a solution pushes the country closer to default, closer to the point where the markets, the people, and even its allies turn away. Dalio calls this the endgame stage, a moment when the choices are few and none are without pain. One of the first moves in this desperate playbook is capital control. Money becomes a prisoner within the borders. Citizens are told how much they can withdraw from their own accounts. Transfers abroad are restricted, sometimes banned entirely. The official reason is to stabilize the system. But everyone knows the truth. The government is trying to keep what's left of its wealth from fleeing the country. This is not just policy, it's a public declaration that the house is on fire. At the same time, central banks often push interest rates to extremes. In some cases, they raise them sharply to lure back foreign capital. In others, they slash them to the floor in a desperate attempt to stimulate the economy. Either choice is a gamble. Higher rates can crush businesses already struggling to survive. Lower rates can sink the currency even further. There is no safe option, only the hope of buying time. Printing money becomes the most seductive temptation of all. Feels like an immediate cure. The government creates new currency, pays its bills, funds its programs, and temporarily calms the storm. But Dalio warns this is the most dangerous path. Every note printed without real value behind it is a silent theft from the public's purchasing power. It is a slow-motion destruction of trust in the currency. A trust that, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild. International intervention can become the final lifeline. Bailouts from the IMF or other lending bodies bring in much-needed foreign reserves. But they come at a price. Strict austerity measures, deep spending cuts, and painful economic reforms. Leaders often accept these terms reluctantly, knowing they may spark public outrage. The irony is cruel. The very help that can stabilize the economy in the long run can ignite unrest in the short term. For the people, these solutions rarely feel like relief. Prices still rise, jobs are still scarce, services are cut, taxes increase, and the quality of life declines. In homes across the nation, kitchen tables become war rooms where families debate impossible choices. Pay the rent, buy food, or keep the lights on. The sense of national pride erodes, replaced by a quiet, bitter question. How did we get here? Dalio reminds us that the endgame stage is a fork in the road. Some countries, through painful but disciplined reforms, manage to claw their way back, rebuilding both their economies and the trust of their people. Others spiral into deeper chaos, crossing the threshold from economic collapse into political or even humanitarian disaster. At this point in the cycle, the decisions made will not just define the economy, they will define the nation's future itself. Every movement, every philosophy faces a moment when ideals meet reality. For the school of life, that moment came when the world shifted into an era of hyperconnectivity and algorithm-driven content. At first, the rise of short-form, bite-sized media seemed like an opportunity. a way to bring their ideas to millions. But in practice, it became a test of whether deep thinking could survive in a culture that swiped away in seconds. Social media platforms began rewarding instant emotional reactions over long, thoughtful engagement. The school of life, known for its deliberate pace and reflective tone, has found itself at a crossroads. Adapt to the speed of the internet or risk fading into irrelevance. What followed was a quiet but significant transformation. Videos became slightly shorter, the visuals more dynamic. Yet the essence remained. Each piece still carried the weight of philosophy, psychology, and art. But this was not without its struggles. Some longtime followers worried that the depth might be diluted. Others argued that adaptation was necessary for survival. It was a delicate balancing act, one that mirrored the very tensions they discussed in their lessons. How to stay true to oneself while navigating a rapidly changing world. Behind the scenes, the creative team wrestled with invisible pressures. The algorithms were unforgiving. If a video failed to grab attention in the first few seconds, it would vanish from the feeds of millions. This reality was in direct conflict with the school's ethos, that wisdom takes time, that meaningful reflection cannot be compressed into a headline or a single image. And yet, they could not ignore the fact that attention was now the rarest and most valuable currency. The turning point came when they realized that adaptation did not have to mean compromise. Instead of chasing trends, they decided to redefine them. Their videos began using stronger opening hooks, not as empty bait, but as gateways into deeper conversations. The tone remained thoughtful, but the entry point was sharper. They embraced animation, cinematic storytelling, and carefully crafted scripts that could hold both the attention of the distracted viewer and the loyalty of those who sought depth. One notable example was a video that began with a provocative question: why do we sabotage our own happiness? In just seconds, it pulled the viewer into an emotional and intellectual journey. A journey that did not shy away from complexity, yet felt personal and urgent. This approach bridged the gap between the modern audience's need for instant engagement and the timeless need for reflection. The result was a renewed relevance. Views began to climb again, but more importantly, conversations reignited. Comments became a place for real dialogue, not just fleeting reactions. The school of life had proven that adaptation and integrity could coexist, but only if guided by a clear sense of purpose. In this turning point, they demonstrated a lesson often forgotten in the rush to keep up. You can evolve without losing yourself. Change, when done with intention, can be a continuation of your values, not a betrayal of them. And in a digital age that moves faster than thought, perhaps this is the truest form of wisdom: to move forward, but never forget why you began. In his latest book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Dalio shares a simple yet profound observation about the rise and fall of nations. He says that a nation's strength isn't just determined by its ability to conquer others, or its wealth, or even its military might. It's also determined by the strength or weakness of the order within. A nation, no matter how rich or powerful, can crumble from within if it fails to maintain the delicate balance between its competing interests. Dalio argues that the real test of a nation's strength lies in its ability to stay united, to maintain trust in its systems and institutions, and to govern effectively. He describes a nation's internal strength as a cycle that begins when institutions are strong and laws are respected, and the people feel that the system is fair. But as the nation prospers, people tend to forget the struggles that built the system in the first place. Divisions begin to grow beneath the surface. At first, these divisions seem manageable: minor political disputes, small differences in economic priorities. But as the wealth gap widens and ideological groups grow more extreme, the very idea of a shared national identity begins to fracture. This is a critical moment in a nation's history, Dalio says. It is when leaders must make difficult, often unpopular decisions to restore balance. But history shows that such moments are usually missed. Those in power often prioritize short-term gains over long-term stability, sowing the seeds of future conflict. As trust in the system erodes, the social contract between citizens and their government weakens. Civil discourse turns into political warfare, and competing factions fight not to solve problems, but to dominate and defeat one another. At this point, corruption tends to rise. Rules are bent, institutions are undermined, and the public starts to believe the game is rigged. Once that belief becomes widespread, even good policies lose their effectiveness, because the people no longer trust the hands that implement them. This breakdown of internal order doesn't happen overnight. It is a gradual, almost invisible decline, much like a bridge corroding from within until one day it collapses under its own weight. Dalio uses historical parallels to show how great powers in the past, Rome, the Ottoman Empire, Qing China, each experienced periods of glorious strength before being consumed by their own internal divisions. In many cases, these nations were defeated not because of superior foreign armies, but because they were too divided to stand together when it mattered most. When internal disorder reaches its peak, it often coincides with external challenges. Rival powers seize the moment, exploiting the weakened unity to apply military, economic, or political pressure. This double crisis, external threats, combined with internal breakdown, marks the tipping point of decline. It is the moment when a nation must either radically reform itself or prepare for a prolonged fall. Dalio notes that while history shows few nations recovering from such a state, those that do manage it always share the same trait: a willingness to face reality and make painful changes. The lesson is as sobering as it is clear. Power is not just measured in armies and GDP figures. It is rooted in the cohesion and trust of a society, when people feel that they are part of a shared mission. When they believe the system is fair, functional, and worth preserving, they will endure hardship and make sacrifices for the greater good. But when that belief is gone, even the strongest empires are living on borrowed time. Dalio leaves us with an uncomfortable truth. Nations rarely collapse from forces they can see coming. More often, they implode from within, undone by the slow erosion of the bonds that once held them together. And when that moment comes, history will not remember the excuses. It will remember only the outcome. When we refuse to adapt, history has shown time and again that we are doomed to fail. History is not kind to those who fail to adapt. Empires, no matter how vast, have crumbled when they refuse to see the world changing around them. Companies, once dominant, have vanished from the market because they clung to old methods. Ray Dalio often says that adaptability is the most important skill you can possess because life will never stop testing you. It's not about predicting the future perfectly, but about evolving with it. Imagine a chess player who refuses to change their strategy no matter how their opponent moves. At first, they may feel confident thinking their well-practiced moves are enough. But as the game progresses, they find themselves cornered, unable to respond until defeat is inevitable. Life works the same way. The environment shifts, rules change. Those who survive are not the strongest, but the most adaptable. In the early years of Bridgewater, Dalio's bold predictions brought both massive success and crushing failure. One wrong call nearly destroyed his firm. But instead of clinging to his pride, he analyzed his mistakes, rebuilt his methods, and introduced a culture where ideas were constantly tested. This transformation was not easy. It demanded that he dismantle old beliefs and embrace uncomfortable truths. Adaptation demands humility. You must be willing to admit that what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. It means letting go of the illusion of control and accepting that change is not the enemy, it's the constant. The world is like a river. You can't stop its flow. You can only learn to move with its current, adjusting your course as new obstacles emerge. In the financial markets, adaptability means evolving with the data. Strategy that yields profit today could become obsolete within months. Dalio's use of principles was his way of staying agile, creating a framework that could be updated without relying on a single rigid formula. The principle was the compass. The path could always change. In your own life, adaptability might mean learning new skills when your job becomes automated. It might mean shifting your mindset when relationships no longer bring you growth. Or it might mean starting over entirely when the path you've walked for years reaches a dead end. The point is not to avoid change, but to make it work for you, because in the end, the most dangerous thing you can do is stand still while the world moves on. Adaptation is not betrayal of your values, it is the evolution of them. You are not abandoning your vision. You are finding new ways to reach it. That is the lesson Ray Dalio leaves us. That survival and success come not from being unshakable, but from being unbreakable in the face of change. History teaches us that no empire, no matter how vast or advanced, can escape the natural cycle of rise and decline. From the Roman Empire to the British Empire, and now to the United States and China, the arc of great powers follows patterns that are eerily familiar. Each begins with a period of unity, innovation, and strong leadership. Then comes expansion, economic, military, and cultural influence, spreading across borders. At their peak, these powers often appear invincible. But beneath the surface, the seeds of decline begin to grow. Complacency sets in. Internal divisions emerge. Financial burdens mount, and as new challengers rise, the old guard must fight harder to maintain their position. Ray Dalio points out that this is not a moral judgment, but a historical inevitability. The Dutch once dominated global trade in the 1600s, pioneering financial systems and maritime technology. Then came the British, whose industrial revolution and naval dominance shaped the 19th century. The United States inherited the mantle in the 20th century, becoming the world's political, economic, and cultural leader after 2 world wars. But now signs of strain are visible. Political polarization, economic inequality, and rising debt are pressuring the American system. While China grows more confident on the world stage, the transitions between global powers are rarely peaceful. The Dutch handed dominance to the British after military and economic strain. The British ceded global leadership to the Americans only after 2 devastating wars, and now the US and China face each other not in open war yet, but in an intensifying contest of technology, trade, and ideology. Dalio warns that when an emerging power threatens to displace an established one, the risk of conflict, whether economic, cyber, or military, rises dramatically. So the question we should be asking is not whether this cycle will continue, but how it will play out in our lifetime. Will the United States and China find a way to share global influence peacefully? Or will history repeat itself with competition escalating into open conflict? Ray Dalio's study of past empires suggests that avoiding confrontation requires mutual respect, strategic compromise, and the recognition that no nation can dominate forever. For individuals and nations alike, the lesson is the same. The world order is not fixed. It is a living system shaped by human choices and historical forces. The decline of one power does not mean the end of civilization, but it does mean the beginning of something new. Those who understand the patterns can adapt, anticipate, and even thrive in the transition. Those who ignore them risk being swept away by the tide of history. In Dalio's framework, this is not a time for fear, but for clear-eyed realism. If we know where we are in the cycle, we can prepare. We can invest in resilience financially, socially, and politically. And we can remember that just as the sun sets on one empire, it rises on another. The arc of great powers is long, but it always bends toward change. The only question is, will we be ready when it comes? A captain prepares for a journey across a vast ocean. Before setting sail, he gathers his crew and asks them to imagine the worst-case scenario for the journey. They challenge his route. They question his decisions, even predict storms he hasn't considered. This is what Ray Dalio calls stress-testing ideas. You see, Ray Dalio is the founder of the largest hedge fund in the world. At Bridgewater Associates, they take this practice to an extreme. Every strategic idea, no matter how brilliant it may seem, must undergo a brutally rigorous test. Every team member, regardless of their rank, is allowed and encouraged to critique it. They must search for weaknesses, poke holes in the logic, and build alternative scenarios that challenge the initial idea. For example, when Bridgewater was considering an investment strategy amid global economic uncertainty, the team didn't just focus on data that supported their viewpoint. They deliberately sought out evidence that contradicted it. They built scenarios like, what if inflation surges beyond expectations? What if interest rates plunge suddenly? Or what if a geopolitical crisis severs supply chains? By doing so, they identified vulnerabilities in their plan, long before real money was at stake. In his book Principles, Dalio explains that, without this kind of stress testing, we fall prey to what Thomas Gilovich calls confirmation bias, the tendency to only seek information that validates what we already believe. Dalio says the greatest mistake isn't mispredicting the future, it's failing to prepare for it. This is why at Bridgewater, they hire people who embody this questioning mindset. They look for individuals who will challenge the status quo, who won't be intimidated by senior colleagues, and who can objectively evaluate ideas based on their logic and data, not their source. Over time, this has created an environment where no idea is safe, which in turn has generated extraordinary results. In fact, investors who stuck with Bridgewater's pure alpha strategy have seen their wealth grow by 3,750%. Between 1982 and 2017, outperforming every major asset class, including stocks, bonds, and gold. Now, of course, not everyone will agree with this approach. Some might find it too chaotic or stressful. Others might worry that it could lead to groupthink or paralyzed decision-making. But Dalio argues that the benefits far outweigh the costs. By embracing a culture of radical transparency and constructive conflict, companies can avoid the pitfalls of groupthink and still reap the rewards of more robust decision-making. In the end, developing this kind of mental muscle helps us all to become more resilient individuals and better critical thinkers. It allows us to see criticism not as a personal attack, but as protection against future collapse. Just as a ship is tested against artificial waves before venturing into open waters, our ideas must be hit by simulated storms before facing the real ones. In every great economic cycle, there comes a moment when optimism begins to outpace reality. According to Dalio, the market moves not only on the foundation of tangible value, but also on the air of collective belief. And it's in this realm where the seeds of the next crisis are quietly sown. The most insidious danger is when people no longer question the system because it feels unshakable. Credit becomes easy, spending becomes abundant, and risk is quietly ignored. It is the calm before the storm, deceptively beautiful, yet silently dangerous. History shows us that this is often the moment when the invisible clock begins its countdown. Consider the roaring 1920s in the United States. The decade was marked by rapid industrial growth, a booming stock market, and technological progress. Yet beneath the surface, speculation ran rampant. People borrowed heavily to invest in stocks, convinced that the market would rise forever. Banks eager to profit encouraged more loans, fueling the illusion of infinite growth. But in 1929, the illusion shattered, and the Great Depression followed. Dalio draws this as a timeless pattern. When the system is overheated, a correction becomes inevitable. In today's world, the same symptoms can be seen. Asset prices rise faster than incomes, debt levels climb to historic highs, and governments inject liquidity to sustain growth. At first, it feels like stability. Jobs are plentiful, markets rally, and consumer confidence soars. But under the weight of excess leverage, the system becomes fragile. One unexpected shock, a policy shift, a geopolitical conflict, or a technological disruption can trigger a chain reaction. And when it does, the fall is often sharper than the rise. Dalio emphasizes that these cycles are not failures of capitalism. They are its natural rhythm. Like seasons, they move from growth to maturity, from decline to renewal. What matters is not preventing the winter entirely, but preparing for its arrival. In his view, the most dangerous time is when everyone believes that the good times will never end. Because that is when caution disappears, and without caution, resilience is lost. The lesson is as much psychological as it is economic. Human nature, he argues, tends to forget the past when the present feels too good. The challenge for leaders, investors, and citizens is to stay anchored in reality, while the crowd drifts toward euphoria. This means asking hard questions, even when answers are uncomfortable. It means resisting the pull of mass optimism, when numbers no longer match fundamentals. It also means building buffers, financial, strategic, and emotional, before they are urgently needed. Dalio warns that those who prepare too late often find the cost of protection unbearable. And those who prepare early may appear overly cautious until history proves them right. Wisdom, in this context, is the courage to look beyond the surface. Ultimately, this stage of the journey is a reminder that the economic machine runs on cycles of excess and correction. And while we cannot predict the exact timing of a downturn, we can recognize its signs. It is about reading the room when others are celebrating without restraint, seeing the cracks before they widen into chasms. Dalio's insight is clear. The ability to survive and even thrive in turbulent times comes from humility during prosperity. because humility tempers risk, and tempered risk builds resilience. In this way, the next crisis becomes not an ending, but a beginning. History often remembers the faces in front, the charismatic CEOs, the outspoken founders, the leaders who become symbols of their companies. But in every great enterprise, there are figures who remain in the shadows, pulling strings, shaping decisions, and influencing outcomes without the glare of the spotlight. These unseen architects operate with a different kind of power, one that doesn't require applause. Their strength lies in strategy, timing, and the ability to move unseen, unheard, without attracting unwanted attention. Think about it. In a world where everyone is focused on the CEO's every move, a company's stock, its quarterly reports, its day-to-day operations, no one is paying attention to the quiet force that is shaping all of this. Let's take, for example, Larry Fink, the chairman and CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest investment company. Fink is often referred to as the man who owns the world, and yet most people have probably never heard of him. He runs a company that manages $10 trillion in assets and can make or break economies by deciding where to invest. He has been called the most powerful man in the world, more powerful than heads of state, more influential than elected officials, and he operates largely out of the public eye. Now, why does this matter? Why is it important to understand the concept of hidden influence? Because understanding this concept gives you a tremendous edge in navigating the complexities of business, politics, and life itself. It allows you to see beyond the surface, to dig deeper into the mechanisms of power. It helps you to recognize that the one delivering the keynote speech might be the face of the company, but behind them sits a network of advisors, financiers, and strategists who are steering the real course. In today's world, we are constantly bombarded with information. We live in an age of transparency, or so we think. But in reality, the vast majority of decision-making power remains hidden behind closed doors. It's buried deep within boardrooms and financial institutions, residing in the hands of individuals who prefer to operate in the shadows. And while this might seem like a contradiction in an age of transparency, it's actually the way power has always worked. The title may belong to the ruler, but the true direction is decided in quiet rooms, far from the public eye. This is the reality of power. And understanding this is the first step to truly seeing how the world operates. So who are these hidden players, and how do they exert their influence? What are the tactics and strategies they employ to shape the world according to their will? To answer these questions, let's explore the inner sanctums of power. Pull back the curtain and unveil the unseen force that is shaping our world. On September 15, 2008, the world watched as the iconic Lehman Brothers building emptied out. People poured out of the doors, carrying boxes with them. Some cried, some looked dazed. All of them were leaving their jobs behind. A few hours earlier, Lehman Brothers, one of the largest investment banks in the world, had declared bankruptcy. In the next few months, 26,000 people would lose their jobs at Lehman Brothers. But their individual stories would be part of a much larger narrative. Their personal tragedies would become statistics in a boardroom presentation. Their faces would fade from the nightly news. Their problems became someone else's problem. How did this happen? How did the fall of one investment bank bring the world to its knees? To understand what happened next, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to the birth of this company 150 years ago. Lehman Brothers was one of the oldest investment banks in America. It had weathered several financial storms in its long history. None of them had been like this. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, it sent shockwaves across the world. In Europe, the headquarters of an insurance giant in Germany was evacuated after a fire broke out. In America, thousands of anxious investors crowded the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. They didn't know what to do with their money. They didn't know what to do with their investments. They didn't know what to do with their lives. And then there were the families who had nothing to do with Wall Street. It's nothing to do with the stock market, everything to do with the economy. Families who had put their trust in the American dream, who had worked hard, saved hard, invested hard, only to see their entire life savings evaporate before their eyes. Suddenly, millions of Americans were out of work, out of options, out of time. Foreclosures went up. The number of people without health insurance went up. The number of people seeking food stamps went up. Everything that kept the American dream alive began to crumble. As the weeks passed, the crisis spread to Asia. Factories shut down. Global trade slowed. Investors started pulling their money out of the markets. Countries that had nothing to do with the subprime crisis found themselves in the eye of the storm. How did we get here? How did the problems of one bank become everyone's problem? What happened next would define a generation. Governments across the world would pour billions of dollars into banks to save them from bankruptcy. Ordinary citizens would be told that the worst was yet to come, and economists would scratch their heads wondering how the world would escape this mess. Every industry has a story, and every story has a climax. In the story of every industry, there comes a moment when innovation stops being a niche advantage and becomes the deciding factor for survival. For Dow Chemical, that moment arrived when competition was no longer just about having a fun interface or colorful design. Other players in the market were catching up. Apps like Babbel and Memrise started offering better grammar explanations, cultural context, and even AI-assisted learning. The battlefield had shifted from merely making language learning engaging to making it deeply effective. Duolingo had to prove it wasn't just a playful app, but a serious contender in the edtech space. The leadership team realized that their biggest threat wasn't losing existing users, it was failing to capture the new wave of learners who wanted measurable results. In business, there's a dangerous moment when your brand becomes good enough in the eyes of loyal customers, but not convincing for potential ones. Duolingo was approaching that cliff. If they didn't pivot and innovate quickly, they risked fading into the background, remembered only as that cute owl app, rather than a global education powerhouse. But pivots take time, and the competition wasn't waiting. Enter AI personalization. Duolingo had always relied on gamified repetition. But now they began experimenting with machine learning models that could adapt to each user's weaknesses. Instead of giving everyone the same lesson order, the AI could identify patterns and mistakes, predict knowledge gaps, and push targeted exercises at just the right moment. This wasn't just about keeping people engaged, it was about ensuring they actually learned faster. The technology turned Duolingo from a one-size-fits-all system into a personal tutor that could, in theory, understand millions of students at once. But this wasn't a one-person revolution. It required a massive internal change. Product teams had to work closely with data scientists. Linguists had to collaborate with engineers, and every decision had to balance educational integrity with user retention. In cinematic terms, this was Duolingo's montage moment, the behind-the-scenes grind of late nights. Whiteboards filled with algorithms and endless testing sessions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the kind of quiet work that decides whether a company breaks through or gets overtaken. The impact was immediate. Completion rates went up, daily streaks lasted longer, and for the first time, Duolingo began winning over skeptics in academia who once dismissed it as edutainment. Investors noticed the shift too. By leaning heavily into adaptive learning, Duolingo positioned itself as not just an app, but a research-driven platform at the frontier of education technology. In an industry where trends fade fast, they had built something more resilient, technology that improved with every lesson, every click, every mistake. But the road wasn't without its challenges. The more the app personalized, the more it relied on user data, and the more questions arose about privacy and transparency. This was the paradox of the modern age. The very thing that made Duolingo smarter could also erode trust if handled poorly. It was a balancing act between pushing the limits of AI and respecting the boundaries of its millions of learners. And that, quietly, almost imperceptibly, was the tipping point. It wasn't just Duolingo teaching languages anymore. It was Duolingo learning how to teach. In the early 2010s, Netflix seemed unstoppable. They rewrote the rules of the entertainment industry with a bold formula: abandon DVDs, pivot to streaming, then create original content that captivated the world. But such rapid success inevitably invited one consequence: war. Disney, Apple, Amazon, HBO, and newcomers like Peacock and Paramount Plus began targeting the very same market. This competition wasn't just about who had the best content. It was about who could control the viewing habits of billions. One of the most decisive moments came in 2019 when Disney pulled all of its content from Netflix. To launch Disney Plus, the move was like ripping out the backbone of Netflix's library. Marvel films, Pixar animations, and Disney's timeless classics that had been a magnet for families. Here, Netflix's core weakness was exposed. They relied heavily on licenses from other studios. When those studios chose to become direct competitors, Netflix lost critical assets overnight. In response, Netflix poured billions into strengthening its original content library. From The Crown to Stranger Things, from Money Heist to Squid Game, they proved that the power of global storytelling could be their ultimate weapon. This strategy transformed Netflix from merely a distribution platform into the largest global content producer in the world. Meanwhile, rivals like Amazon Prime and Apple TV Plus didn't face the same financial constraints. Amazon could subsidize its streaming service through e-commerce profits, while Apple relied on its massive hardware ecosystem. This meant Netflix was fighting on an uneven battlefield. The streaming war had become more complex than simply who has more movies. It was now a question of who could keep burning money the longest to dominate attention. Viewers, however, began to feel fatigued. Many jumped from one service to another just to watch a single hit series, then canceled their subscription, a phenomenon known as subscription fatigue. This became the biggest strategic and psychological challenge for every player, not just getting customers to sign up, but keeping them. In this landscape, one truth became clear. Victory would not be decided by catalog size, technology, or price alone. Victory would belong to whoever could build habits. Netflix aimed to be the first screen audiences opened whenever they had free time, sometimes even before they consciously knew they wanted to watch something. Behind the scenes, its algorithms were engineered to study taste at a microscopic level, serving recommendations that made you press play without thinking twice. Ultimately, the streaming wars are a story about the power of narrative in the digital age. Every platform is trying to tell a story not just on the screen, but in the minds of its viewers. This is your home for entertainment. For Netflix, holding the throne means continuing to win a battle that never truly ends, a battle for attention, for time, and for the world's imagination. We've reached the end of our journey through Ray Dalio's thinking. But before we get there, at the end of our journey through Ray Dalio's thinking, we're faced with a simple truth. Principles are only the map, reality is the terrain. Dalio teaches that every major decision is born from patterns. Patterns that repeat throughout history, even as the context changes. He believes that understanding cycles is the key to understanding the future. And this is where our transition begins, because the future he speaks of is now being shaped not only by economic shifts, but by technology that is rewriting the very structure of civilization. Dalio often speaks about civilizational turning points, moments when a single innovation shifts the balance of power, opening a new era while closing the door on the old. In the 15th century, Gutenberg's printing press shattered the church's monopoly on knowledge. In the 18th century, James Watt's steam engine ignited the Industrial Revolution. And in the 21st century, artificial intelligence is both the printing press and the steam engine, ushering us into an entirely new age. This is the moment where Dalio's principles meet Sam Altman's reality. Dalio emphasizes reading the wave before it breaks, while Altman doesn't just read the wave, he creates it. OpenAI was born from the conviction that AI is a force capable of reshaping economies, jobs, and even the moral fabric of humanity itself. If Dalio talks about the patterns that shape the future, Altman talks about building that future from scratch. The correlation is clear. Dalio gives us the lens to understand the risks and opportunities in any great transition, how power rises and falls, how instability fuels innovation, and how leadership is defined by the ability to navigate uncertainty. Sam Altman is a living case study of this theory. He reads the same map, but chooses a different path, not merely anticipating the future, but accelerating its arrival. This isn't just a change of characters, it's a change of scale. From Dalio, we learn how the system works. From Altman, we see how a person can change the system itself. If Dalio views change as a natural cycle to be navigated with discipline, Altman sees it as a blank canvas to be filled with vision. In every long journey, there comes a point when the map is no longer clear. The compass spins aimlessly, and the fog hides the path ahead. Most people stop, give up, or turn back. But for Ray Dalio, moments like these are not obstacles to avoid. They are the very heart of the game. the battlefield where principles are forged. His life journey, from a middle-class kid in Long Island to founding Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, is not merely a financial success story. It's the story of how principles became the anchor that kept the ship steady through the fiercest storms. Dalio believes that life is a series of inevitable cycles, waves of prosperity, followed by currents of destruction, and then back again. His first principle is to accept this reality without illusion. No trend rises forever and no storm lasts forever. The difference between those who survive and those who sink lies in their preparation, not when the sky is clear, but when the clouds start to darken. Dalio built his mental framework to anticipate, not to react. He sees every crisis not as a random event, but as a recurring pattern visible to anyone patient enough to look. But principles are not born in boardrooms or business seminars. They are born in the crushing weight of failure. In 1982, Dalio was so certain of his global economic forecast that he bet everything on his credibility, his capital, his reputation. The result? He was dead wrong. He lost money, the trust of his clients, and even had to borrow from his father just to survive. It was in this darkest moment that he discovered the foundation for his life's blueprint. Radical truth and radical transparency. Radical truth means facing facts, no matter how brutal. Radical transparency means allowing those facts to be examined by everyone without ego or censorship. At Bridgewater, this became part of the company's DNA. Every idea is tested, every decision recorded, every mistake dissected not to shame, but to strip away the biases that cloud judgment. Dalio believes people are often trapped by the ego barrier, the desire to look right instead of being right. In investing, this ego is poison. By cutting it away, Bridgewater built a culture where reality is faced exactly as it is, no matter how ugly or unconventional. Dalio also teaches that life follows the equation: pain plus reflection equals progress. Every pain is a signal not to be avoided but to be studied. Wrong market prediction? It reveals a blind spot. Stung by criticism, there's a truth you haven't accepted yet. Losses? Your strategy needs adjustment. For Dalio, pain is the most honest teacher if you have the courage to look it straight in the eye. And perhaps his final principle is this: make peace with the things you cannot change, and maximize control over the things you can. Life, he says, is like playing chess against the universe. You can't change the rules, but you can sharpen your strategy, lasting longer, playing smarter, and sometimes winning the rounds that seemed impossible. As the camera slowly pulls back, we see Ray Dalio, not just as a legendary investor, but as a mental architect, someone who has built a bridge between chaos and clarity. His principles are a map, not to avoid the storm, but to navigate through it. And perhaps in an increasingly uncertain world, this is his greatest legacy: the reminder that survival is not about physical strength, but the strength of your principles. We often think that life is about finding the right answers. But Ray Dalio reminds us that life is really about asking the right questions and having the courage to face them. Markets will always change. The world will always be unstable. And life, in the end, will always test us. The difference between those who survive and those who collapse lies in how willing we are to learn from the past, adapt in the present, and build the future on solid principles. Not everyone will be ready to do that. But if you've made it this far, you're already one step closer. Remember, success is not a prize for the smartest, but for those who are the most disciplined, the most adaptive, and the most honest with themselves. Dalio says that the most important question you can ask yourself is, how can I get better? And the willingness to confront your own weaknesses and biases is the key to unlocking your true potential. Are you ready to face your weaknesses and biases? Because let me tell you, the world is full of opportunities for those who are willing to learn and adapt